Okay, so hopefully you're aware of the fact that our body has things compartmentalized, and we compartmentalize them sometimes with cavities. And that's to provide some protection, but also to prevent friction. So let's say like every time the heart beats, if it was directly fused to tissues right next to it, it would pull and tear on those tissues. So we're gonna stick them in basically little water balloons. So they're going to be in a structure that folds right around the organ. So let's specifically go through that one for the heart first. This is not what the heart actually looks like in the body, but hopefully you get the idea. So here's our heart, and we're going to put a little sac around it. Now what's going to happen is part of the sac will be on the outside, but then part of it folds back in and actually merges with the outer wall of the heart. And so we have this sac that it's just kind of like nestled into. So you can picture like a balloon and you're going to stick your hand in it. The one that actually touches the organ, part of the name actually means organ. So we have a visceral. So visceral means organ. So visceral, and now we're talking about the heart, so you name pericardium. So visceral pericardium. To tell you specifically which organ you're touching. So peri means around, card means heart, so break down the words. Now if you're on the outside of the sac, we call that parietal. And that will be consistent. It doesn't matter which organ that cavity is touching. And so the parietal pericardium is the outer one. Now this membrane is actually a simple squamous epithelium. It's called a serous membrane. And the reason why it's called a serous membrane is because in this space, we're going to fill it with a serous fluid. And so that space that holds the serous fluid, that's going to be called a cavity. And again, since we're around the heart, it's a pericardial cavity. We'll do the same pattern for all of the other cavities. So let's say instead of it being the heart, it's a lung. Again, bad art's coming. So here's our lung. If you're touching the lung, so if you're actually fused with the organ, that would be a visceral layer. And so we use a visceral layer, and then we're going to wrap around and have a parietal layer. And so parietal here. But remember, you've got to be specific as to what organ you're surrounding. So parietal pleura is what you're going to use for the lungs. And so we'll have a visceral pleura for the one touching the lung. The space in between, pleural cavity. So the space here, space there, pleural cavity. Again, serous fluid in there to allow for some of that friction rubbing, but also it creates tension. So as your ribs move, it'll pull on this one, because the ribs are actually going to be attached to the parietal pleura. That is going to allow for the lung to inflate with the ribs, because you have water molecules that are going to stick to each other and pull on things and kind of keep those two surfaces near each other by providing surface tension. Now, as you're looking at the term pleura, to try to remember that, how many lungs do you have? You have two. So plural, for the lungs. Okay, let's go one more. Let's talk about abdominal content. So same idea. So let's try to draw an organ here. We'll just do an intestine. Try to make my art not as ugly. So we have an intestine there. Again, you're going to have part of the cavity that's going to touch the organ. So it's going to be visceral. You're going to have a part of that cavity that's on the outside, so it's folded back. That's going to be our parietal. But now it's a peritoneum. So we have a visceral peritoneum touching the abdominal organs, a parietal peritoneum on the outside of that abdominal cavity, and then the space in between, peritoneal cavity. So again, it's pretty predictable. The basic plan you got to keep track of, it's visceral, touches the organ, parietal's on the outside, the cavity is the space where you have the serous fluid, and you just have to keep track of pericardium deals with heart, pleural deals with lungs, and peritoneum deals with the abdominal stuff. All right, everyone, thanks for watching.